So I guess we'll go ahead and get started. I think we've got probably most of the people here who are going to be joining us right away. I am, for those of you I didn't already meet, I'm Laura Swanson. I am with THDA and will be your presenter today for the data part of our housing needs analysis for the Upper Cumberland Development District. Amara Mattingly is the senior research analyst who completed most of the analysis and developed most of the slides. So I will do my best to fill in for Amara's knowledge on all of the information that she developed. We want to start by thanking our host, Megan Reagan, the community development planner, and Tommy Lee, the deputy director here, who are both here with us in the room. And we really appreciate you're allowing us to use this amazing facility. This is such a beautiful space to be able to present in and share all this information. So for those who are not very familiar with the process, the state of Tennessee consolidated plan serves as the state's application for our $50 to $60 million a year in annual federal funding from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, specifically certain grant programs. We receive the funds from HUD, the state does, and through several different agencies, including THDA. We then pass through those funds or distribute the funds to local communities. And we do this in the Community Development Block Grant Program, which is actually the funding is received through the Department of Economic and Community Development, the Emergency Solutions Grant, the Home Program, the National Housing Trust Fund. All three of those are THDA administered programs. And then the Housing Opportunities for Persons with HIV or AIDS, or HOPWA, which is initially received by the Department of Health, the State Department of Health. And the consolidated plan, we come together and work to create an opportunity for the state to assess Tennesseans' housing needs. And then we want to coordinate with local stakeholders to address the different issues that we find and set priorities for these programs. Just as a note, there are other participating jurisdictions as the state. We're a participating jurisdiction for HUD. There are other local participating jurisdictions. I don't think there's another local participating jurisdiction in the Upper Cumberland area. But for example, in Middle Tennessee, there is the city of Nashville receives their own HUD grants. And so their planning process is separate from ours. This is the consolidated kind of a summary or overview of the consolidated planning programs and kind of how the HUD funding flows down through the different programs and who those programs benefit. So I'm just going to pause for a minute on that slide and let you kind of review it. As I'm sure everyone in this room and hopefully most of our virtual groups know, the majority of almost all HUD programs serve families. We use AMI. We use that acronym a lot for area median income. And almost all of the HUD programs are focusing on households that are 80% or below AMI. But some of the programs serve an even lower income level, an extremely low or a very low income level. So we wanted to make sure that we kind of shared that the data in the presentation is not going to completely or even maybe accurately capture the needs of your communities. That's one of the reasons we do the focus group sessions at the end, is we really want you to see what the data is showing, what it's revealing about housing needs, and then have you give us feedback on what you're actually seeing in your communities and what you think the actual needs are in your communities. But as you review the slides, we'd love for you to kind of keep in mind and think about for the Q&A later, because we'll have a Q&A that the virtual participants and the participants here with us today will have a chance to participate in, and then we'll break into focus groups at the end where just the people who came today will be able to give us more in-depth feedback. But we'd really love you to be thinking about what you notice in the data, what you think accurately captures your community's experiences or what seems off. If we're missing something, if there are data points that you think would be helpful that aren't in the presentation that you'd like to see, please share that with us. The data included is not going to capture the strengths of your communities. It's not going to capture qualitative characteristics like close-knit communities or generational connections and ties to land, or anything about the unique culture of this region. And again, that's why we're really seeking feedback from the community, is we do want to hear about those things and how they intersect with housing. And in the focus groups, we really also want, and we'll have some questions that guide us to really hear about what you see as your community strengths. So our agenda, first, I'm going to go through the presentation and all the graphs. Then we're going to have some questions and answers from the group. So definitely write down anything or be thinking about any questions you might have. And then we'll have focus groups, and we'll probably, this is a small group, so we probably won't split. We'll probably just have one focus group where we go through some different questions or take different feedback in two areas: housing affordability and homelessness. And then I've handed out for each of you, you'll see there's a sheet that is questions that are specific to fair housing. That's really my focus area at THDA. And we, as part of the consolidated planning process, we conduct an analysis of impediments to fair housing choice. And so during this planning process, we're really trying to include fair housing questions in the different areas of housing affordability and homelessness, rather than taking them kind of separately, but really thinking about fair housing measures and fair housing and how it impacts the different affordability and how different groups are impacted by different housing needs. But there is a sheet with questions that we would love to get your feedback on, and those would be in writing. We're not going to necessarily go through that question list separately. So for the group that's here today, we'd love to get your feedback specifically on any barriers. And there's some descriptions for what you need to think about on those sheets. And then we'll also talk a little bit about that in our focus groups. So we like to start off with kind of an introduction to how we approach the framework for how we are approaching the consolidated planning and the housing needs environment. And the different things that we think about when we're working on planning, which is current housing supply and housing prices, the current population and households and incomes. What are we seeing that is that today in those demographics? And then also thinking about the future, like what is expected, what future housing supply might be needed, because that's where grant funding would really be effective. Today, we have to think about the future. And then also housing instability and future population and households. So you'll see as we go through this framework, kind of leads us through the different analysis that's been completed. And as we look at the framework, we're asking ourselves questions about the region, what housing is needed, and what happens if the housing isn't built. And when we think about the region, we want to look at who lives here, what comprises the current housing supply, how much does housing cost, what housing is needed, how do we know we need it, what are challenges to building it, and then what strategies may help us to build it specifically in our focus groups. And then what happens if the housing isn't built? Well, we know that housing instability is created where we have gaps in housing availability. And in the focus group at the end, we'll speak about the strategies that may address that to try to avoid some of that housing instability in this particular region. So we're going to start off with some demographics on what the current population, households, and incomes look like in Upper Cumberland Development District. So these are your different development districts and the population, just to kind of give you a comparative. The counties that are within the Upper Cumberland include about 362,000 people as the total population. You can compare that with some of the other development districts, the greater Nashville region obviously being one of the largest with over 2 million. But where you have your larger cities, you across the state, you see larger development district populations, which just makes sense. But looking at population change, so as you can see, we've had in most areas of the state growth over the past 5 years. The rate of that growth differs a bit across the state, but the Upper Cumberland is kind of right in the middle. So you've had almost a 5% population growth. You compare it to the Nashville region, which is kind of next door in terms of development districts, and theirs is about double. And then we've seen a little bit of a decrease in population over in the Mid-South and the Memphis area. And this is more specifically to your counties where you've seen population growth, and in pretty much I guess every county but Pickett, you can see on this graph, Pickett and Clay. There has been some growth. With Putnam, it's a little bit hard to read that. It's 6.1%, and Cumberland at 5.8%. And then Van Buren, which has always been a quite rural area, has seen an 8.9% growth. So even though it's a really small county, that's a significant growth for a small population to absorb. And Macon up in the top has 9.1. But generally growth throughout the region. And then the demographics. Typically in the planning, we look at age, race and ethnicity, and household income. We do try to do some measures around disability. That's a measurement that's a little more difficult to capture. But this gives you an idea of the age distribution throughout the Upper Cumberland Development District region. And so as you can see, it's primarily from a race and ethnicity perspective, it's a primarily white population. Very small Black percentage population, but Latino Hispanic almost 5%. And then all of the races are about 3%. The age distribution, you've got about 21% that are older adults over 65, and about 23% there at the bottom that are children. And then everything else is kind of in the middle. And the arrow, just to kind of point out on the household income distribution, that is your median income. She's put that arrow there to make that very clear. And so you can see the more than 60%, really approaching 70% of the population is below $75,000 a year. And then you've got a smaller population there, and that's fairly common that you have the smaller populations at the top end of the income distribution. And then renters versus owners, again, this is something that's pretty consistent throughout the state. There are 73% owners versus 27% renters, although 27% renters is a pretty significant, percentage of the population that is in need of rental housing. And if I'm going too fast at any point, tell me to slow down or stop, because I'm known to be a fast talker. So this next graph helps you see the homeownership rate here compared to other areas of the state. And Upper Cumberland has a very strong homeownership rate comparatively. Not completely surprising. There's where we see more rural areas, you do see often more single-family housing, either rented or owned, and definitely a higher rate of ownership. So you have a 73% versus, for instance, the Greater Nashville region, which is 65%. And then over in Memphis, 57.6%. So the whole eastern region, it hovers around 70% for home ownership. And then looking at the age distribution of renter versus owners, this is also the findings not terribly surprising. You have owners skew a little bit older than your renter households. Although, the majority of both is in that mid-age adult population, but younger adults, you have a very small slice that actually own housing in the region. But that's pretty consistent with what we would expect. And then when you look at racial composition, again, this is where we're building in some of the fair housing measures. So kind of looking at demographically, who is a renter and who is an owner. And in your renter households, 89% are white with 4% Black population. And then in your homeowner, you have 96% white versus less than 1% Black. So there is some disparity there. Hispanic, you have a 6.4% of the renters are Hispanic, and then 2% of owners. So again, a little bit of a disparity there. And then moving on to renter and owner incomes. So again, this graph finding not terribly surprising. The renter household incomes are lower in general than the owner household incomes. It's hard to pull out other demographics when you look at this, like are some of the lower income owners maybe older adults who are now on a fixed income? Probably. There's probably some characteristics there that aren't obvious from this graph, but your owners are falling probably 60% of owner households in the region have an income of below 75,000. And then in your renters, it's, much higher percentage. It's 75, 80% are below 75. And I think one of the things to really pull from this graph is that 67% of your renters are below 50,000 and 40% are below 20,000. So later when we talk about the need in terms of what's the price point of housing that's needed for renters in the community, that 27% of the population, and also to owners, what's the price point for sale homes that are needed? It's really important to keep these, keep the income, the average income of the population in mind, which you have here. And so which is just kind of another way of looking at income. So this is the owner households by area median income, where they're distributed on the area median income. And because so many of our grant programs are really look at the distribution by area median income, we always like to include that as well. And again, you can see 60, almost 70%, 65 to 70% of renters are below 80% AMI. So they're low income. Almost 80% of the renter households that are going to be seeking rental housing are going to be in those low income ranges. Owner households is different. You have much more that are above 80 and percent AMI and more than 50% that are above 100% AMI. So again, that's another really important thing to think about when you're thinking about what type of housing is needed in the communities. So then the next graphs will focus on current housing supply and housing prices in the area. And we have lots of different types of housing. I really like this graph when Amara created it because it really shows a continuum. We have everything from market rate homeownership and market rate rental housing down to people who are unhoused and don't have access to housing in terms of what we see. And when you look at the AMI bands she's added, it's what we kind of typically expect to see households in those AMI bands that would occupy that type of housing. And so a lot of the graphs use that underlying framework you'll see as we go through them. And then on the bottom, I should also mention that she has characteristics that you often see along this continuum as well. So the type of housing units that are most common in this development district, clearly single-family homes. Detached single-family homes is the primary type of housing at 71%. Mobile homes, that's a fairly high percentage at almost 16%. And then your larger multifamily buildings are much less common. There are some, and probably many of them are here in Cookeville, I would guess, knowing the region. There are some, but there aren't nearly as many as you have single-family homes. So renters are also living in some of that single-family housing stock. This is really a national graph for housing starts. And what it's showing is that housing supply has really not been keeping up with demand or need, particularly since the 2008 housing crash and recession. Probably not news to anybody in this room or probably in the virtual community. We had a bit of recovery You can see that in 2014 to 2022, but we're not nearly at the rate of housing development in single family, multifamily, or manufactured housing that we were in, say, the mid 70s or even the mid 90s. So it's really a phenomena that's driving a lot of the issues that we see. We also like to look at the median age of rental housing, and I don't believe it, at least in the research I've done in the past, this would reflect substantial rehabilitation. But this is the median age of when rental housing was built. And this is really true across the state and also pretty true, reflective nationally, unless you get into a very large city, that's had a lot of recent growth, like Nashville has had so much recent growth. You're looking at, average age or median age of rental housing at 45. Putnam and Cumberland have the lowest at 33 and 34 years. So a lot of the rental housing stock that is available is older. And if it isn't being substantially rehabilitated, it probably is in need of substantial rehabilitation. And then this is the median age of owner housing, a little bit younger, but very close, between 30 and 40 years old, and even a little bit older in Warren and Van Buren. So now we're going to look at prices. The meat of the story. So as you can see, the triangles I think are really helpful here. The bigger the triangle, the greater the change. And if it's facing up, that means that it's a growth. If it's facing down, it means that you've seen a decrease in median gross rent. And I don't think there's any areas with a decrease. We do have some in the state. And you'll see some areas, again, you look at Van Buren, and I guess Van Buren fascinates me because I worked in rental assistance for years in that county, and we almost could never lease vouchers there because there was so little housing. So it's amazing to me to see, it's a $658. And I think this is a good graph to explain that, we're using ACS data, that we're using census data to inform all of these graphs. And it's always a little bit of a lag. So to me, I always look at these median gross rent, and it seems a little low to me. And that's part of what we want to hear from you. But there's definitely a lag here. But the percentage changes are really significant. Of course. Let's see. I'm not sure where I think this is just taking the median. I don't think that there's a bedroom attached to it. So this is including all sizes of units, because she would have the bedroom size if she had done the analysis based on that. So, I would say major growth changes in most of the counties in the region. So your median home sales price looks similar, if not substantially more significant. So you have over 100% in Warren. And then
I think we were looking at Cumberland County
right. So for virtual world, a comment was just made that in Cumberland County, it's usually over $300,000 now, which would make sense in the data lag. So when we think about taking all of that, we want you to kind of absorb all of that and think about what housing is needed and what challenges you're experiencing in your communities to building that housing. And we're going to look a bit at the future housing supply now. We want to think about future housing supply as you look at these graphs. So this is the rental cost burden across the state. And again, it's, this is all the different counties and the regions together. And in Upland County, it says 38% of households are cost burden. You compare that to Greater Nashville region, and it's 46%, and then over Memphis, 49%. But again, there's probably some lag in these figures, and we definitely want to hear if you think that's accurate or if that number might be higher or lower. But still, it's 38% of the rental population, so it's a significant number. And then the percent change. So the percent change doesn't look as large in Upper Cumberland. It looks like over the past 5 years, it's just been a 2.4% change in increase in the number of rent cost burdened households. And you compare that to like Greater Nashville, which is almost 18%. And then, of course, we see some declines in some areas of the state. And so county specific. So here we do see some declines. So we'd really like to hear your feedback on whether or not you think that is a declining cost burden. There's a declining number of households with a rental cost burden. Because it looks like in Cumberland, it's gone down quite a significant percentage. But then you look at Van Buren, and it's a massive increase of cost burden renters. Same thing with DeKalb. Of course, we know in those smaller counties, those percentages mean fewer people, but still those are pretty alarming percentages. So keep that one in mind as we have our discussion later. And then this is severe rent cost burden. So severe cost burden households spend 50% or more of their income on housing. So they're really, when someone's severely rent cost burden, they are sacrificing other essential needs. They may not be buying medicine. They may not be able to, they may have food insecurity. They may not be able to purchase as many groceries or as healthy of food. They're having to make some serious choices. And so in Upper Cumberland, that looks to be about 18% of the population. And that's a fairly standard across the state, 18 to 20, except for the Memphis region. Still 20% of your population with a severe rent cost burden is concerning. And this is the percent change. So while we saw earlier in the slide that the percent change in was not as high in severe rent cost burden, it has gone up 5.4% in the past 5 years in this area. So that's a pretty significant change. And this shows you every county where it's gone up and where it's gone down. And again, this is another thing, anyone who works in these counties, it would be good to hear if you think this is really reflective, that the severe rent cost burden has gone down, for instance, in Van Buren and Warren, and just gone up minimally in Putnam, but gone up significantly in White and DeKalb, and down in Cumberland, actually. So moving into homeowners, the Homeowner Opportunity Index tracks the percentage of homes sold in a calendar year that would be affordable to a household who's within the area median income. And we showed that area, kind of think back to that area median income slide that we showed earlier, and the number or percentage of households that are under that. And it looks like in the Upper Cumberland region, about 44% of homes that are sold in the past year. And I think she did this is 2022, so it would have been for that calendar year of 2022, were affordable to a household at the area median. So less than half. But you look over in Nashville, and it's about a third. And I think the figure that surprised me the most was East, where Knoxville is situated, because I'm not sure if you've seen the national reports that it's one of the fastest, if not the fastest, growing increase in prices in the nation. So this is clearly a little lag. This is 2022, so it's not reflective of what we're seeing today. And then this is the Homeowner Opportunity Index by county. So definitely seeing a decrease in affordability. Pretty significant numbers throughout the region. Decrease in affordability at the median income. So then further moving on, we've shown you a lot of slides and a lot of data and graphs about needs and what is currently available. And now we're going to kind of move into the conversation about when there isn't housing available, what do households experience? Or when there isn't income available to afford the housing that's available in the market, what is created, which is housing instability, and then look at who is experiencing this in your region. And this could mean not just if there's not housing affordable, but also is it the right type of housing for the populations that you have? Is it the type of housing that they need or that they're looking for? So we're starting with the map of the continuums of care, and this is bigger on your screen than my screen. But you can see this is the region that the Upper Cumberland continuum of care is who serves this region. I think it's Upper Cumberland HRA. And for that region, this is the point in time count. And I'm not sure if everyone's familiar with what the point in time count is, but once a year, the continuum care goes out and does an actual physical count of people that they can find that are unhoused. And so this was the point, and the point in time count is always an underreporting of homelessness, but it is the best physical observation that we have once a year. And what you can see is that point in time count between 2017 and 2023 in this region increased pretty dramatically or significantly. And this is the age distribution from the continuum care agencies from their point in. This is on the left side. This is the age distribution for the area. And on the right side, it's the point in time age distribution for the people that were found to be homeless at the time of the point in time count. So you can see 13% were children and 3% were older adults. And that number is smaller in terms of older adults than we're seeing in some areas. But when you look at the next category, which is 35 to 64 years old, it was 57%. And so it's hard to say what percent of that group was nearing older age. But we do know that there's a trend, that there's a rising number of seniors and older adults that are experiencing homelessness. And so your young adult and your youth, we like to pull out the youth as well because there's a lot of programs that are specifically directed at youth in that age range. And so we thought that was an important group to pull out and show you a little more specifically. So your children, people from 0 infant to 24 is about 20% of the count in this area. And so this is by race. So you have your race distribution on the left side and then your point in time. And as you can see, you have your overall population, only about less than 2%, about 1.5% is Black households, but 9% of the households who were homeless at the point in time count were Black households or Black individuals. And so that is definitely a disparity that probably should be thought about. A little bit different in Hispanic, it looks like there's a very low Hispanic Latino representation in the point in time count. But again, largely in terms of race, the households that were counted were white. And this is cost, burden, and race in areas with we always look at concentrated poverty. This is a HUD measure that is important, but also a good measure to look at in terms of considering fair housing implications. And so if you look at cost, burden, and race in areas, this one's a little more difficult. You really kind of have to look at it. I had to look at it when I was reviewing the presentations. In the census tracts of the concentrated area of poverty and a high level of severe cost burden, 26% of the heads of households are part of minority racial groups. So it shows you within your counties, and it's a little bit hard to see on the graph. There's, I think, really only one area where you have a concentrated area of poverty, and it's in Putnam County, and it's surrounded in red. And it also shows that, not surprisingly, in that area, the vast majority of households are severely cost burdened. And so it's that combination, that interaction of where you see concentrated poverty and race is really important to the work that we do in housing, and is an area that HUD asks us to consider carefully. And that is it for me. I am now on to questions and answers, and this is for the virtual community as well as the community that's here with me today. So, and if you would like me to go back to any graph, just tell me which one and I'll put it back on the screen. Yes, well, there will be, I can't remember the specific, definitely all of this will be available there, and there's actually some additional information. So the research team has done some really great work on the mismatch in units available and housing need. They just weren't quite ready. So not only will all of this information be available and part of the analysis, we'll also have more information for you when the plan is fully completed. Right, we're in shelters versus, yeah, and I don't know. Oh, so the question for the virtual community is what percentage of the point in time count was sheltered versus unsheltered? And I'm not sure, but we can provide that if that's helpful. I think I should say, I think we have that. I don't know for sure. Josh Amara might know. I'm not sure if she's on with us.
She's not.
She's not, okay.
No. Do have a question from the chat though.
Okay.
What impact do Tennessee Tech students have on these numbers?
That is another good question we'll take down, looking at some of the analysis, and that would be good to talk about in the focus groups as well, if you think it's having an impact, but where you have university areas in general. Now, in this area, Tennessee Tech would be that impact, but it's not in the information that I have today. So the question is about short-term rentals and taking away from housing stock. There definitely have been some studies in that area. I don't know how many studies are specific to Tennessee. I know Nashville engaged in the city of Nashville, some pretty significant data gathering. I don't know what they found, but we'll definitely make a notation if there's anything that we can share about that. And then in the focus groups, if you think, we definitely want to hear from you if you think that that's having an impact, because then that will drive where we dive deeper in the future research. Yes.
You're taking homes off the market.
And I was a victim of that personally, when buying our first home. That was something that we could afford below 300,000. It sat on the market forever, went to auction, they sold it, and then it was up for rent for 2,000 a month after that.
Yep.
And so, that has happened a lot.
And for the virtual group, this is a question and a comment about investments and how investors purchasing, especially single family homes, is having an impact on the availability of homeownership for potential homeowners, and specifically raising the rents, purchasing a home and then the rent being higher than what the mortgage would have been for the home buyer. And we are looking at we're really kind of referring to it as corporate ownership. There is our research division is looking into that. But again, a great thing for the focus groups. If you think that is an issue, if you're seeing or experiencing that as an issue in the area, we want to hear about that so we can include that as an indicator.
You talked a little bit about.
Yes.
I don't know how those statistics are obtained, but Does it factor in sharing homes? Because one of the things I'm seeing through our clients that we serve are
Right.
a lot of people, including families, not just young adults, but sharing homes.
Right. So the question or comment is about sharing homes and whether or not the rental cost burden or I assume home ownership cost burden, housing cost burden reflects when homes are shared. And I don't know exactly how the census question is answered. That's a good question or asked, how the census question is asked. But we'll make a notation, and we have heard that in other focus groups. So if you're, again, that's the thing, if you're seeing, we definitely want to hear if you are seeing a lot of sharing and think that's impact, people are, especially if you feel like people are having to make that choice because there's no other way for them to afford, which is what I assume. Right.
Down, something have to answer what's changing.
Right. And the comment was, what else would explain a decreasing cost burden? And it could be anomalies in the data. There were a lot of difficulties with the census during COVID. So it could be that's one of the reasons we come out and ask people and don't just rely on the census data, but probably it is reflective of things like sharing.
Clay County, Clay County, our smallest, so it would have a very
Right.
small margin right there.
Right.
that they could have.
Right.
Jada, which I know you said you come out and
Right.
deal with people and you got things yourself, but basically relying on the census before.
So all of the slides except for the point in time count, and then there was another slide that was a national graph, and I'm not sure the data source for that. I can look, but the vast majority of the slides is based on census data, and I think the range is the 5-year period was 2017 to 2022, which is the most current. Right.
Showed our population was declining.
Right.
Somewhat, and I've yet to agree with that.
So the comment was related to the census data and showing declines in the population and concerns that that's not accurate. Yes, and that's been expressed in many communities.
One thing jumps out, get to the age of our housing stock, because we've been working with a group up in Cumberland County. And you see that back in the 70s and 80s, huge number of homes being built, and then it just started dropping. And
Right.
we're working with a developer to try and put some multifamily like apartment units. And I think it would be the first one built in like 12 to 15 years.
Right.
We're not building.
Right.
We're growing in population, but we're not building additional homes to live.
Right.
Is there much resistance to, homes?
No, we haven't had any resistance up there, and it's affordable. It's not household income.
Yeah.
I just don't think, I think a lot of problem here in the Putnam County area is we've got a lot of local developers that are building at a particular price range.
Yeah, right.
It is that upper price range.
Yep.
And you don't have those starter homes being built like you used to for a younger couple.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And the comment was about for the virtual joiners was about the lack of building in the area, especially multifamily housing, and building that is going on being of a certain price point that is not necessarily affordable. I guess summarize that. Josh, are there any virtual world questions and answers? Answered all their questions with those graphs. I should say Amara answered all their questions with those graphs. Okay, so if there's not any more questions, we're going to move on to the focus group part of the meeting, which will not involve the virtual community. So we will log off of the Teams meeting. I'm going to leave one more, like 2 or 3 minutes for people if you have questions and you haven't put them out or you have comments into the chat, and then we will log you off the Teams. I see a thank you, but that's